Hi, my name is Christopher Malcolm, and welcome to Movable Canvas, where we talk about cinema, arts, culture, and where those three things sometimes intersect. In today's episode, we're all kings of the world as we return to the 1997 blockbuster and Academy Award winner for Best Picture, Titanic. Holidays mean different things to different people. Thanksgiving here in America tends to be a time to get together with family, binge a large amount of turkey, and try desperately to avoid the topic of politics. Me, I'm a bit of an introvert, a big introvert actually. So for me, holidays are an excuse to kind of get away from the hustle and bustle, be alone, and kind of remain glued to my couch all day watching movies. Sometimes the films in questions are planned specifically to coincide with the holiday in question. Sometimes the rare amount of free time allotted by the day off simply means that I can take time to watch a longer film than I might otherwise have time for. Such was the case this Thanksgiving when I decided to pull up James Cameron's Academy Award winning crowd pleaser, Titanic. Now, if you've been following my channel for any amount of time, you'll know that I make a point of uncovering some of the best films from the history of cinema. Often those films are classics from Hollywood's golden age, foreign films, well-regarded indies. So some might be surprised to know that Titanic is one of my favorite movies. Even upon its release 25 years ago, wait, can we stop for a moment to think about the fact that this film is already a quarter century old? Good gracious. But back to the essay. Even upon its release some 25 years ago, Titanic was hardly known for its edge. This was a million miles away from some quirky or dark indie film. This was big studio Hollywood filmmaking at its best. Huge budget, huge special effects, which, by the way, still kind of hold up mostly today. Despite the fact that they had both already had early successes, this would be the film that would make Leonardo DiCaprio and Kate Winslet household names. The kind of gargantuan success that would link the two actors forever in the history of movies. The type of pairing that will undoubtedly lead to a future Academy Awards telecast where both are 75 years old and they come out on stage together and sing a duet of My Heart Will Go On. Speaking of Celine Dion's career-defining hit, that song is so synonymous with the film that upon repeated viewings you have kind of no choice but to spend a large amount of the running time simply waiting for that song to happen. But on top of all that, Titanic also arrives at the tail end of a point where it was still possible to make the type of film that doesn't often get made anymore. I don't mean the large budget visual effects spectacle, I mean we still have plenty of those. But there's a naive optimism and openness to the film that I must admit seems lost from our modern world. I remember sitting in the theaters in 1997 and being kind of simply swept away as Leo and Kate stood at the front of the ship, falling in love, basking in the setting sun to the swelling orchestral music. I can only imagine if the film were to be released in 2022, that moment would be interrupted by a million snarky tweets from people trying to prove they're too cool to fall in love and trying to discount the film simply for owning up to a real human emotion. Don't get me wrong, I mean, the moment is corny, but love is a little corny, so why should we be able to hide from that on screen? The other way in which Titanic is a film from another era is that it was one of the last big budget pictures to both break box office records and be a critical success. We now live in a world where movies tend to be one thing or another. Big budget spectacle that sells a lot of tickets but is ultimately a vapid experience forgotten the minute we walk out of the multiplex. Or beautiful filmmaking, powerful storytelling which plays to a limited audience of cinephiles and industry insiders but never makes much of a dent outside of metropolitan areas. This is what ultimately leads to our new annual phenomenon of casual film fans complaining about the Oscar-nominated films because they haven't seen the film, and the popular films getting shut out of most major categories aside from special effects. As someone who takes the Academy Awards more seriously than perhaps I should, I don't mind big budget action films not getting Academy Awards. I mean, simply put, most of those huge films, while fun, don't really add anything to the cinematic narrative and don't actually deserve an Academy Award. But I am fortunate to be old enough to remember a time when one could make a movie that was both salable and good at the same time. Titanic was a kind of a peak example of this, and this is what leads me to still so highly revere it today, even though it's kind of corny. Of course, it helps that the film was written and directed by James Cameron. Interestingly, I wouldn't say that James Cameron is a name that all usually just right away comes to my mind when I think of my favorite directors. One thing must be said for him. The man simply knows how to make movies and knows how to make huge popcorn movies that are also seem to manage to have memorable plots and exceed the expectations of their genre. Aliens, the Terminator movies, True Lies, Avatar. Cameron is clearly a commercial-minded director, but still never one who you could accuse of making films that are generic. I definitely wouldn't call him edgy, but he does push technology in a way that makes his films always seem to be on the cutting edge, while at the same time not making the same mistake as most big budget films, being that his films don't depend on the technology to be good. I mean, sure, Titanic has a great deal of special effects, but the story of Jack and Rose is what gives it its narrative engine. Leonardo DiCaprio had already done films like What's Eating Gilbert Grape, The Basketball Diaries, Romeo and Juliet by the time Titanic came around. Absolutely bursting with talent and charisma from the word go, Titanic made Leo a movie star. I'll admit, I knew he had acting abilities back then, but I have to tip my cap to Leo, who has gone on to forge a significant career as an actor by being able to sniff out good roles and work with skilled directors. This has allowed him to avoid the fate of just being a pretty boy and to be part of some genuinely great works of cinema. Kate was always more indie-minded before and after the breakout and success of Titanic, and she too has gone on to a long career of taking interesting roles beyond just being a pretty ingenue. The story of Titanic is an age-old one. Guy from the wrong side of the tracks falls in love with a girl from another world, but despite contrary breeding, they are soulmates. And the rest of the story is driven by the question of whether or not love can conquer all. As a screenwriter, your job is to put real stakes in front of your protagonist to complicate their journey. So setting this familiar love story aboard the most famous shipwreck in the history of the world both ups the stakes and provides an overriding sense of foreboding to the proceedings. Not only do these two have to overcome societal conventions and Rose's semi-psychotic fiancé, played by Billy Zane, they must also overcome the prospect of imminent death. I doubt there are many people on the planet now that aren't familiar with how the film ends. I mean, you've probably found yourself at one point or another in a heated debate about the seating capacity of a specific wood door floating in the Atlantic Ocean. But for those who still haven't seen the film, I won't say much more about the plot. Not that the plot turns are wholly unpredictable, yet Cameron is so adept at weaving us through them that I don't want to steal it away from anybody who might be uninitiated. The film isn't perfect. I mean, rewatching it over the holiday, it did become clear to me just how long the first act goes on. No doubt there's a lot of exposition that story needs to get out of the way before the arrival of Leo and Kate, but given the film's 3-hour and 14-minute runtime, one can't help but to imagine in some sense that they could have cut a little bit of that out. Then again, I do enjoy all the real-life cameos and insider historical information, so my nerddom doesn't really mind. I mean, in being a classic movie person, I love spending time with Gloria Stewart, so that's much appreciated. One thing I will never begrudge the film for is the absolute commitment it makes to telling a purely romantic story with all the tools and conventions Hollywood has to offer. No, it may not be dark, edgy, or remotely cool, but it is what big-budget Hollywood filmmaking has to offer at its best. Beautifully polished cinematography and refined and detailed art direction. A big movie score that stirs our hearts. A title song that you'll still be singing 25 years later. Two memorable lead characters that are simultaneously easy for the audience to relate to, while at the same time not being so generic as to be forgettable. A plotline that is rooted in convention, but which heightens that convention to create something that feels novel. And a director at the top of his game, providing both high-octane entertainment and skilled filmmaking at the same time. I admit that I do sometimes long for the day when every big box office movie wasn't yet another forgettable Marvel movie, or a franchise, or a pre-existing IP, or even a sequel. Even Cameron is set to make 4 more Avatar movies, so I may soon regret having said such nice things about him in this video. But I have to believe a world still exists where well-told original stories don't have to be relegated to the tail end of people's Netflix queues, where we can blend big budget and originality and truly come up with movies that are both crowd pleasers and worthy of the year-end awards. The market for films today is very different than it was 25 years ago. I mean, streaming has already changed the theatrical landscape. The global pandemic didn't make things any less complicated. But one has to believe that with the ungodly amount of money spent on sequels and superheroes, if you were just to peel off just a little bit of that and give it to a filmmaker with an original crowd-pleasing idea and let them tell the story in an interesting way, that audiences would show up and we could all be kings of the world again. I'm off now to perform an a cappella version of My Heart Will Go On. I won't subject you to having to listen to that. That'll be a little too traumatic. But I do want to thank you for taking the time to watch yet another episode of Movable Canvas. If you like this kind of analysis and discussion, do hit the like and subscribe buttons below and let me know what you think of the film in the comments. We all know it can be a little corny, but tell me the truth. You enjoyed it, didn't you? Yeah, I know you did. At the time, did you think Kate and Leo would go on to have successful careers? What was the last big budget Hollywood film you felt also deserved awards recognition? And until next time, thanks for watching and have a great day.